Good morning, boys and girls. Um, this week, we're going to move to finish all of Julie of the Wolves. And I'm going to be posting a schedule through Classroom. And at one point, the reading is going to get a little bit longer than shorter. But we need to get this moving. And I suggest that you really do follow the readings on video. If you're behind, it's really your job right now to get caught up. So today we're going to be starting Kapugen the Hunter, which is part 3 of Julie of the Wolves. I want you to realize that in part 2, we leave off with Julie leaping lightly heading to San Francisco. She has had trouble with Daniel and has decided that she cannot remain in Barrow. So this is actually where the beginning of the book starts. It starts with her lost and looking for the wolves to help her eat. So as we continue, I want you to keep that in mind. We've learned about her childhood. We've learned about what brought her to Barrow. We've learned about why she's now left Barrow. So age-wise, excuse me, pardon me, age-wise, she is now about 13, okay? So she left out Martha at about 9. She's lived in Barrow for about 4 or 5 years, and now she's on her way to San Francisco. Okay, so those of you in the old book, we're going to start on page 109 and end on page 122. And those of you in the newer edition, we're going to start on page 127 and stop on page 142. Okay, let me just show you the picture where she's off into the wilderness on her way to Point Hope to catch the ship, the North Star, to head for San Francisco. So let's see. The wind vanished. The wind screamed, "Oh, wee." Miex touched the lichen on the top of her frost teeth. Amarok, she called again. Then she ran down the slope and called to the wolf den. The sight was silent and eerie, and the puppy's playground was speckled with bleached bones like tombstones in a graveyard. He picked up one and saw that it was jagged with the marks of little teeth, with some carving. It could be made into a comb she had been wanting. Glancing around, she saw the club-like base of an antler. A weapon, she said. I may need it. Boys and girls, notice how much she's become immersed into her Eskimo culture and truly loving it now. A snowy owl floated past, turning his head as he peered down at her curiously. I'll see you in San Francisco, she called. He set his eyes on some distant goal, bowed his wings, and flew southward as silently as the shadow he cast. The wind twisted a strand of her hair, and as she stood on the wolf hill, she felt the presence of the great animals she had lived with. Amarok, Nails, Silver, Kapu. She wondered if she would ever see them again. The wind gusted. She turned and walked slowly back home, trailing her fingers on the tips of the sedges and thinking about her departure. At the top of the frost heaves, she froze in her tracks. Her house was crushed in, and her sleeping skins were torn and strewn over the grass. The meat she had laid out of the grass was gone. Her icebox was opened and empty. Ah, ye, she called. My food, my life, I'm dead. Running from broken house to dumped cooking pot to icebox, she felt needles of fear move up through her spine, spread into her arms, and pierce her whole body. Who had done this? What bestial creature had taken her food? She looked desperately around and saw, crouched in the reeds beside her, the angry Jello. His tail was swishing slowly. His ears were forehead. She understood his message and stepped back. Then she knew that was wrong. She must not give in. She tightened on the antler club, brandishing it, growling, and then she flung herself upon him and bit the top of his nose. His eyes widened, his ears and body drooped, and his tail went between his leg. He groveled on his belly and came up for her, smiling, head lowered humbly. Desperate, furious, she lunged at him. Jello rolled to his back and flashed the white hair of surrender. She did not strike. She could not strike a coward. Jello, she cried, why did you do it? Holding him in abeyance, away from her with the antler, she glanced around the ruins of her home and took stock of the damage. All the food in the cellar and on the ground was gone, and her pack was not in sight. Brandishing her weapon, growling at Jello, she backed toward the sod house, kicked back the ruins, and saw the pack under the crushed roof. It was intact. Jello had not found the meat in it. Her mind raced. She had a little food, and Kapu had told her that the lemmings were coming back. She could make it yet. Gnarl, she snapped at Jello and lowered her club. He rolled over, stood up, and tail between his legs, fled into the twilight. When he was gone, she stood for a long time. Finally, she picked up her sleeping skin and tore a fiber from the new hide. She got out her needle and, sitting with her legs out straight in the manner of Eskimo women, she began to sew. A lemming ran across a lichen patch. She stopped work and watched the little animal add a mouthful of grass to around its nest. A movement caught her eye, and she glanced up to see the least weasel washing his belly on the other side of the knoll. New white fur was splotched across his gold back. He finished his toilet, and when he sat down, he disappeared under the reindeer moss. You are tiny, she said, and smiled. Another cycle was beginning. The animals who preyed on the lemming were also coming back. Miax put her needle away, rolled her ground skin into a tight bundle, and tied it to the bottom of the pack. Then she got her pot and sleeping skin, her ulo and man's knife, the bones and her flowers. She packed them, tied a thong to the new caribou skin so she could drag it behind her, and lined up her pointer storage stones with a distant frost heave. It's time to go, she said, and walked away, not looking back. Many hours later, she opened the pack, spread her skins, and took out a strand of smoked meat. A snowshoe hare screamed, and she recognized the cry of death. Miax picked up her club and ran off to take the rabbit from its killer. Rounding a clump of grass, she came upon enormous Wolverine, the king of the Arctic weasel family. Slowly, he lifted his head. Shoo, she said. The Wolverine was built low to the ground, and his powerful front feet were almost as big as man's hand. Utterly fearless, he looked her in the face. Shoo, she said, and jumped at him. He left the rabbit, came toward her. She jumped back and raised her club. He leapt lightly to the side, snarled, and sauntered away. Gingerly, she snatched the hare, turned, and fled back to camp. The Wolverine's fearlessness sent goosebumps up her spine. Hastily throwing the hare on the caribou skin she was dragging for just such a purpose, she walked on. A tern floated past. She took out her sinew, held her arm under the bird, and singing aloud, strode toward Point Hope. Sinew is like it's almost like an elastic. It's a tendon that animals and people have in their body, and that's what she's using to measure her distance. At sunset, the clouds were dark and soft-edged, like bears. They could dump a foot of snow or a sprinkle of snow. She dug a niche in the side of a heave with her man's knife, folded her ground skin into an envelope, and pushed it inside the cave. With deft hands, she pressed her sleeping skin into the envelope, then undressed. The fur nestled her, and when each toe and finger was warm, she peered solemnly out of her den. The sky darkened, the clouds lowered, and the wind blew, like a charging buck. In less than a minute, she could see no more than the fur around her face. The snow had come. Buried in her skins like an animal in its lair, Miax wondered about Amarok and Kapu. Would they be curled up in furry balls, or would they just be running joyously through the first storm of the winter, following their noses to game? When she awoke, the sun was out, the sky was clear, and only a feathering of snow covered the tundra, just enough to make it winter. Before she had dressed, however, the crystals had melted, all but a few of the north sides of the slopes that spoke of things to come. Miex pulled a out of her hair, snarl out of her hair with her fingers, then looked around. Someone was watching her. Running to the top of the hill, she scanned the flatness. A dozen stout caribou, with white necks gleaming in the sunlight, browsed in the distance, but there was nothing else. She laughed at herself, went back to camp, and ate a piece of smoked meat. Rolling her skins and shouldering her pack, she walked to the caribou skin, pick up the leads. It was empty. Somebody had taken her rabbit in the night. A Wolverine, she thought, but there were no footsteps. There were no, oops, sorry, folks. But there were no footsteps. Oh, I lost my place. Okay. It was empty. Someone had taken her rabbit in the night. A Wolverine, she thought, but there were no footsteps to tell which way the thief had gone. She spun around. Again, she felt as if someone were watching her. Hold on, I'm going to shut off my phone, folks. Sorry. We don't need that. There we go. Okay. Taking a bearing on them with her sinew and adjusting her pack, she gave the skin drag a yank and walked on. All day the birds moved overhead. She walked a straight line to the ocean, for the pools had frozen and she could follow the compass without deviating. When the eerie feeling of being watched persisted, Miax began to wonder if the vast nothingness was driving her mad, as it did many Gusaks. To occupy her mind, she sang as she gathered caribou droppings, put them on her drag. Amarok wolf, my friend, you are my adopted father. My feet shall run because of you. My heart shall beat because of you, and I shall love because of you. That evening, she stopped early, built a bright fire, and cooked a stew, adding it to the sweet leather lichen from the tundra. While the pot simmered and the steam hung above like a gray spirit, she took out a needle and thread and mended a hole in her old mitten. The earth trembled. She glanced up to see two of the largest caribou she had ever beheld. She could tell by the massiveness of their antlers that they were males, for those of the females are much more slender and shorter. As the two ran side by side, the gleam of their headpieces told her it was breeding season of the caribou. When the last fuzzy antler coating summer is rubbed off and the horns glow and shimmer, the mating season begins, a season of bellowing and short tempers. Suddenly, the lead bull circled and came toward the other. Both lowered their heads and clashed antlers with a clanging sound that sounded like a shot. Neither was hurt. They shook their heads and stepped back, tossed their antlers, and bellowed. Colliding again, they pawed the ground and then peacefully trotted away. Miax wondered who they were fighting over, for not a female was to be seen. All the bravado and glamour seemed lost on the grass and the sky. Nevertheless, when she had eaten, she picked up her pack, tugged on her cumbersome drag, and moved on. The thundering animals told her she was along the migration path, and she did not to camp in the middle of a caribou love nest. Far from the herd, she stopped by a pond and made her bed. She was not sleepy, so she took out wolf puppy bone, and holding the ulo between her knees, carved a tooth in the comb. Orange and purple shadows crept over the land as the sun went down that night, and Miax crawled into her sleeping skin, noting that the days were growing shorter. She felt restless like the birds and the mammals, and in the middle of the night she awakened and peered out at the sky. A star twinkled in a half-lit dome, the first of the year. She smiled, sat up, and hugged her knees. The guidepost of her ancestors, the North Star, would soon be visible and would point her way when the birds had all gone south. Softly across the distance a wolf barked, then another. The first bark was one of inquiry, a sort of, "Where are you and what are you doing?" The answer was a casual, "I'm here." The next call, however, was disquieting. The wolf seemed to say that there was danger in the air. Miax looked around to see what it might be. Then the wolf charged the subject, shifted to a joyous howl. As the others joined in, she recognized the hunt song of her pack. Imrok's rich tones rose and fell like a violin. Then came the flute-like voice of Silver. Nail's voice arose, less strong than Amarok's, bringing variation to the theme. Cupping her hands behind her ears, she listened intently. Yes, the pups were singing too, and sounding very mature and grown up, until Kapu added his laugh bark. She listened for Jello to sound forth. He did not. The concert ended abruptly, and she heard other sounds in the dimness. A lemming screamed in death. A flock of migrating eider ducks called out their positions to each other. Suddenly something moved. She bolted out of bed and grabbed her club. The grass crackled beneath her, and she spun around. Sedges bobbed to say it was only the wind. Aye, she was disgusted by her fears. She kicked a stone to change something, since she could not change what she was doing, as Kapugen had advised. Feeling better, she slid back in the skin. I guess, she said to herself, that the sun's been up so long I've forgotten the sounds of night. As she waited for sleep, she listened to the polar wind whistle and the dry grasses whined like the voice of the old bent lady. Jello, she screamed, sitting bolt upright. He was almost beside her, his teeth bared as he growled. Then he picked up her pack and ran. She jumped out of bed and started after him, for her very life was in that pack. Food, needles, knives, even her boots. The wind chilled her naked body, and she stopped to collect her wits. She must act with wisdom. She must think. Her clothes, where were her clothes? They too were gone. No, she remembered they were safe in the bladder bag under the caribou skin. Quickly, she pulled them out, clutched them to her chest. But they were of little comfort. She could go nowhere without her boots, nor could she make new ones. Her needles and ulo, the tools of survival, were all in the pack. Shivering, she slid into bed and cried. A tear fell on the grass and froze solid. My tombstone. She lay very still, wondering how long it would take life to leave her. When she opened her eyes, it was daylight, and the warm yellow of the land gave her hope. She could eat her caribou skin if she had to. Rolling to her stomach, she smelled something sweet and recognized the scent of wolf urine. It had been dropped at the edge of her bag, which was frozen but fresh. Someone had greeted her during the night. It could not have been Jello, for the scent did not have the bitter odor of an angry, desolate wolf. Furthermore, it was sparsely given, not the dousing given to hostile objects. It must have been Amarok. She sniffed again, but her nose was not sensitive enough to read the other messages in the urine that meant all is well. Yet its light and lovely scent gave her a sense of security, and she smiled at the sun, dressed, and put her mind to inventing boots. Wrapping the drag around one foot and her sleeping skin around the other, she clomped awkwardly through the grass in a wider and wider circle, hoping that Jello, having eaten her meat, would have abandoned the pack. She did not care about the food anymore. Her ulo and needles and the matches were the most important to find. With them, she could make shoes, hunt, and cook. She marveled at how valuable these simple things were, how beautiful and precious. With them, she could make a home, a larder, a sled, and clothes. And the cold air was equally precious. With it, she could, like her father, freeze leather, sinew into sleds, spears, and harpoons. She would not die here if she could find her ulo and needles. As she carefully searched the ground, she began to think about Seal Camp. The old Eskimos were scientists too. By using the plants and animals and temperature, they had changed the harsh Arctic into a home, a feat as incredible as sending rockets to the moon. She smiled. The people at SEAL Camp had not been as outdated and as old-fashioned as she had been led to believe. No, on the contrary, they had been wise. They had adjusted to nature instead of to man-made gadgets. Aye, she gasped. On the side of the groundswell lay Jello, his body torn in bloody shreds, his face contorted. Beside him lay her backpack. Instantly, she knew what had happened. Amarok had turned on him. Once Kapugen had told her that some wolves had tolerated a lone wolf until the day he stole meat from the pups. With that, the leader gave a signal, and his pack turned, struck, and tore the lone wolf to pieces. There is no room in wolf society for an animal who cannot contribute, he had said. Jello had been so cowed he was useless, and now he was dead. Slowly she opened her pack. The food was gone, but her needles, ulo, and boots were tucked in the pockets where she had put them. They were now more wonderful to Miax than airplanes, ocean liners, and great wide bridges. She put on her shoes. She checked her man's knife and matches. They were there too. Life was hers again. Slinging her pack to her shoulders, she placed a stone at Jello's head and turned away. You've got to be a super wolf to live, she said. Poor Jello was not. She left him to the Jaegers and the foxes. Amarok, wolf, my friend, she sang as she walked along. Amarok, my adopted father. Reaching Point Hope seemed less important now that she had come to truly understand the value of her ulo and needles. If she missed the boat, she could live well until another year. Her voice rang out happily as she sang and followed the birds and her compass. Okay, boys and girls, that's today's reading, and I'm going to post it in about 20 minutes. And I'm going to do another reading later today and hopefully get that posted too as we move along. I will put a schedule into Classroom so that we know what direction we're headed in. And I'm really going to ask you for your time and attention to help us move through this. Okay, folks, right now, see you later.